So, this happened last weekend, and I'm still trying to process it. I was on a trip with a couple of friends to a small, secluded cabin in the woods for a weekend of relaxation and fun. It was supposed to be just a chill getaway where we could enjoy nature, eat junk food, and binge-watch movies. The cabin was a couple of hours from the city, deep into the forest. No cell service, no distractions, just us and nature. We arrived on Friday evening, and everything seemed perfect. The cabin was cozy, with a wood-burning stove, a big kitchen, and a porch overlooking a serene lake. The setting was picturesque, and honestly, I was excited to disconnect from my phone for a couple of days. We got settled, made some snacks, and started playing board games. The night was full of laughter and good vibes. Everything was going as expected. The next morning, we woke up to a beautiful, crisp day. After a quick breakfast, we decided to take a walk through the woods to explore. Now, I'm not exactly an outdoorsy person. I like nature and all, but I'm not the type to go off trail and get into risky situations. But my friends, let's just say they're the type who like to push boundaries a little. They suggested that we take a trail that looked a bit less traveled, but I wasn't convinced. At first, I resisted, but they were persistent. Come on, we're in the middle of nowhere. You'll love it, they said, practically dragging me toward the trail. And, being the person I am, I reluctantly agreed. We started walking, chatting, and making jokes along the way. The deeper we went into the forest, the quieter it got. The only sounds were the occasional bird and the rustling of leaves underfoot. It was peaceful, at least for the first few minutes. Then, things started to get weird. As we walked, we started noticing some odd things. For one, there were several animal carcasses, deer, mostly, strewn along the path. And I don't mean like, oh, here's a carcass from a few weeks ago. I mean fresh, decaying deer, and some of them were missing limbs. The further we walked, the more unsettling it became. One of my friends, let's call him Mike, kept insisting that it was just nature taking its course, but I wasn't so sure. I'm no expert on animal behavior, but something didn't feel right. At one point, we found a small clearing where there was a large, old tree in the center. The tree's trunk was hollow, and someone had carved strange symbols into the bark. There were remnants of what looked like old, torn pieces of fabric tied to its branches, and there was a strange smell in the air, like rotting meat mixed with something chemical. Now, I'm not usually one to get paranoid, but the whole situation was starting to freak me out. The vibe was off. Okay, I think we've seen enough, I said, trying to sound nonchalant but failing miserably. Let's head back to the cabin. But Mike was all in at this point. Come on, we've come this far. What's a little further? We continued down the trail, and it only got weirder. We started seeing things that didn't seem to belong in the woods. Broken down cars, old appliances, even a partially collapsed shed that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The air was growing thick and humid, and the smell from earlier seemed to be getting stronger. Finally, we stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. In the middle of a small clearing was a large wooden structure, a kind of shack, but with no windows and only a single, heavy-looking door. The entire place was covered in moss and vines, and there was a faint, low humming noise coming from inside. Guys, we need to leave. Now, I said, my voice shaky. But Mike and the other friend, Sarah, were already walking toward the shack. It's just an old hunting cabin, don't be such a baby. I couldn't believe they were still going toward it. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around and run back to the cabin. But I didn't want to be the only one to back out. So, reluctantly, I followed them, my heart pounding in my chest. As we got closer, the humming grew louder. We reached the door, and Mike reached for the handle. I'm not sure what possessed me, but I grabbed his arm and pulled him back. Don't open it, I whispered. He looked at me, confused, but before he could say anything, Sarah nudged him. Let's just check it out. We're fine. Against my better judgment, I let them push the door open. The inside was pitch black, but there was a faint glow coming from the back of the shack. As they stepped inside, I hesitated. I was standing on the threshold, and something told me not to cross into that space. But Mike and Sarah were already inside, looking around like they were at an abandoned amusement park. I decided to step in, just enough to see what was going on. And what I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the back of the shack, was a large circle etched into the floor. At first, I thought it was some kind of ritualistic symbol, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw something much worse. The floor was covered in dried blood, and in the center of the circle, there was a small, dismembered animal. It looked like a rabbit, but its limbs were twisted in unnatural angles, and its eyes were wide open, frozen in terror. I gagged, nearly collapsing on the floor. I grabbed Mike's arm, pulling him back. "We need to go now." But Mike, who had always been the adventurous one, wasn't having it. "It's just some weird art project or something. Chill out." Before I could respond, there was a sudden noise, a low, guttural growl, not from an animal, but from somewhere in the distance. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My body was in fight-or-flight mode, and I was ready to bolt. But then, the door slammed shut. We were trapped. We all panicked. Mike tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Sarah was crying, and I was frantically looking for any escape. The humming sound was louder now, almost deafening. It wasn't coming from inside the shack, it was coming from somewhere outside. Then, we heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. That's when I finally snapped. "We have to leave now," I screamed. I started slamming my fists on the door, yelling for help. It felt like forever, but eventually, the door gave way, and we stumbled outside. The moment we were out, we didn't stop running. We ran all the way back to the cabin, barely looking back, and locked the door behind us. That night, we stayed inside, keeping the lights on and not daring to go back outside. We never went back to that part of the woods. In fact, we left the next morning without so much as a goodbye to the cabin. To this day, I still don't know what we stumbled upon, but I don't think I ever want to find out. Moral of the story? Don't go off trail in the woods. And if you find yourself in a creepy shack, just turn around and leave. Trust your instincts. They're usually right. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by accidentally getting a stranger kicked out of a bar, and then making it worse by trying to fix it. So, this happened last weekend. I still can't believe how everything spiraled out of control. I guess I'll start from the beginning. A few friends and I decided to grab drinks at a local bar we all like. It's not anything fancy, just a dive bar with decent music, good cocktails, and a relaxed atmosphere. My friend Sam, who's kind of a regular there, told us it was karaoke night, so we were excited for that. It was going to be a pretty chill evening. What could possibly go wrong, right? We got there around 9 p.m. and it was packed. People were already up singing their hearts out, and the whole place was buzzing with energy. We found a table near the back, ordered a round of drinks, and settled in. I'm not really the karaoke type, but Sam had been hyping it up, and I figured I'd get a drink in and maybe do something embarrassing later, who knows. The night was going well. We were all chatting, catching up on life, and trying not to make fun of each other for singing karaoke badly. Then, around 10:30, something weird happened. A guy walked in, tall, a bit too flashy for the vibe of the bar, wearing sunglasses indoors and a leather jacket that looked a bit too shiny. He immediately started drawing attention, but not in the good way. He had this cocky swagger about him, almost like he thought he was the main character in some kind of movie. You know the type. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. He grabbed a seat at the bar, ordered a drink, and started talking to the bartender. But then, things took a turn. This guy started loudly complaining about the music. He kept yelling things like, "This is garbage. I can't believe you guys let this trash play, and I could do this way better than anyone here." He wasn't talking to anyone in particular, but it was clear he was trying to get attention. The bartender, who was a pretty chill guy, just nodded and kept doing his thing. But that wasn't the worst of it. A couple of songs later, the guy walked over to the karaoke stage and demanded to sing next. The host, who was already visibly annoyed by him, politely told him that there were a few people ahead of him, and he would have to wait his turn. Well, the guy didn't like that. He threw a tantrum right there in the middle of the bar. Started yelling about how he deserved to sing first because he had a better voice than anyone here. The guy's tantrum lasted about a minute before he stormed off and started pacing around the bar. This is where I messed up. I was sitting there, a bit tipsy, and I overheard the guy saying something like, "If they don't let me sing first, I'll make sure they regret it." I have to admit, I was pretty annoyed by his whole attitude. So, being the somewhat passive-aggressive person I am, I leaned over to Sam and said, "If he's such a big shot, why doesn't he just go to a bigger bar and stop bothering us?" I didn't realize it, but the guy had walked right by our table at that exact moment. He overheard me and immediately stopped in his tracks. He turned to face me, and I saw his face twist in anger. Before I could even react, he started going off. "What's your problem, huh? You think I don't belong here?" he yelled. "I'll show you who the real star is." I was caught completely off guard. This dude was not backing down. I tried to laugh it off, maybe to de-escalate the situation. But it just made him angrier. He started throwing insults, saying things like, "People like you always think they're better than others, and you probably don't even know how to sing." Honestly, I was just trying to have a fun night, and now I was getting verbally assaulted by this random guy. The bartender saw the commotion and came over, trying to step in. He told the guy to calm down, but the guy wasn't having it. He just kept yelling. And that's when I made an even bigger mistake. I didn't know how to handle the situation, and I guess my brain didn't think things through. I said something dumb, like, "Maybe you should just leave if you're going to cause a scene." Big mistake. The guy, even more enraged, pointed at me and said, "Fine, I'll leave, but you'll be sorry." At that point, he stormed out of the bar, muttering threats under his breath. I thought that was the end of it. Maybe he would go cool off somewhere, and we could just get back to enjoying the night. But no, this is when everything got completely out of hand. About 10 minutes later, the bouncer came up to our table. He was a massive guy with arms like tree trunks. He asked me, "Hey, are you the one who told that guy to leave?" I froze for a second, unsure of how to answer. Yeah, but," before I could explain, the bouncer cut me off. "Well, the thing is, he just called in a complaint, and he's saying you were the one who started the whole thing." I looked around at my friends, who were equally confused. "Wait, what? That's not true." I was just defending myself. Apparently, the guy had a history of starting trouble at that bar, and they didn't want him to come back. The bouncer said they had to ask me to leave. I was in total shock. I didn't even know what was going on, and now I was getting kicked out because of some random guy's ego. I tried to explain my side of things, but the bouncer wasn't having it. I felt so embarrassed. We packed up, left the bar, and as we walked to the parking lot, I could hear the guy's voice in the distance. He was laughing, probably thinking he'd won some weird battle. But it didn't end there. The next day, I felt awful. I knew the guy was probably exaggerating, but I didn't want to leave things like this. So, I did the stupidest thing possible. I decided to call the bar, hoping to smooth things over and fix the mess I'd created. The moment I got the bartender on the phone, I started apologizing for the incident. But then, the bartender said something that made my stomach drop. Actually, we've been meaning to ban him from here for a while, he said. He's a regular problem, and we've gotten a ton of complaints about him. You know what? You kind of did us a favor. We'll make sure he's not coming back. I stood there, flabbergasted. I hadn't even realized that I'd helped them out by getting the guy to leave. What a weird way to do a good deed. So yeah, that's how I accidentally got a guy kicked out of a bar by making a passing comment and then made it worse by trying to fix it. Honestly, I'm still processing how it all went down. What a night. I'll definitely be thinking twice before trying to play the role of peacekeeper again. TIFU by accidentally sending a naked picture to my boss. This all started innocently enough. I had just gotten out of the shower after a long, exhausting workday, and I was feeling pretty good. You know, the type of good where you're standing there in the bathroom, hair dripping, contemplating whether you should go out with your friends later or just collapse into bed and call it a day. I opted for the latter, but before I could completely check out for the night, I figured I'd check my phone for any important messages. Now, I don't know about you, but when you're done with a shower, you often have your phone nearby, right? And naturally, I thought it was the perfect time to catch up on messages, scroll through some memes, and maybe fire off a text or two to my group chat. At the time, I was juggling multiple threads, including one with my coworkers, another with my friends, and one with a few close family members. It's not uncommon to have your phone blow up when you're involved in several ongoing conversations, and that's exactly what happened. As I'm scrolling, one message stands out. It's from my boss, Tim. He'd sent me a message about a report I had submitted earlier that day. The feedback was brief, but there was something about his tone that made me a little nervous. It was cryptic enough to make me wonder if I'd done something wrong, so I decided to go ahead and look over the report again to make sure I hadn't missed anything. I opened the report from my phone, which, of course, led me into the document viewer app. While I was doing this, I absent-mindedly set my phone down on the bathroom counter, where it had been charging. I'm pretty tech-savvy, and like most people my age, I've gotten used to texting and multitasking. I had intended to continue texting my friends about plans for the weekend, but as I got absorbed in analyzing my work, my mind started to wander. It's easy to get distracted when you're looking at a document and trying to figure out what's wrong with something. I began to absent-mindedly scroll through the gallery on my phone, flicking through random pictures from my recent vacation, some screenshots of meme conversations, and then I stumbled upon a picture I had taken earlier that day. Let me explain the picture. It wasn't a typical selfie, but rather something taken in the spur of the moment, as I had just finished a workout. I was feeling pretty good about my progress and wanted to document it. You know, one of those shots where you're standing in front of a mirror, flexing your muscles, and thinking, yeah, I've come a long way. It was innocent enough, but there's no denying it, my reflection was, well, a little more exposed than I'd initially realized. I wasn't fully naked, but I definitely wasn't fully clothed either. It wasn't a full-on nude picture, but you could see enough to make anyone raise an eyebrow. I should have deleted it, honestly. But for whatever reason, I didn't. I just kind of kept it. Anyway, I didn't think anything of it at the time. That is until I thought I was scrolling through my group chat to message my friend Kyle about what time we should meet up for drinks, but in my distracted state, I sent the picture to my boss instead. It wasn't until about a minute later that I realized what I had done. The horror hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt my stomach drop to the floor as I quickly grabbed my phone and saw the notification that the picture had gone through. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing, and my brain was spiraling. I opened the message thread to see that the picture was now sitting there, waiting for Tim to open it. I don't know what was worse, the fact that I had sent an inappropriate photo to my boss or the fact that it was now too late to take it back. My finger hovered over the screen, desperately considering options. Should I call him and explain? Should I just pretend nothing happened? Should I send a follow-up message with something completely random to distract from the photo? I immediately thought about the latter. I frantically typed, "Hey, sorry, wrong message. Please ignore that." What I meant to send was a follow-up question about the report. My bad, I'm multitasking a bit too much today. I hit send, my fingers trembling as I did. But then, in the madness of trying to cover up my mistake, I accidentally sent another message that wasn't supposed to go to Tim. I had meant to send a simple LOL to my friend Kyle but somehow accidentally hit send on my message to Tim. It read, "Just sent him a dick pic by accident, LOL." I froze. I stared at the screen, horrified that I had just confessed to sending a picture I hadn't meant to send, and that I had followed it up with a comment that was just as bad. I quickly deleted the message, but I was unsure if Tim had already read it. A few seconds passed, then a minute. I felt like the longest amount of time had passed in my life. Finally, my phone buzzed, and I saw the dreaded name pop up, Tim. My palms were sweating as I slowly unlocked my phone and opened his message. "Hey / my name, I assume that was a mistake, and I'll pretend I didn't see that picture. But I do appreciate the follow-up message. I've got to say, though, let's keep the personal stuff to a minimum, especially during work hours." I trust this was unintentional. I stared at that message for what felt like an eternity. My brain was racing, trying to figure out how to respond. I had already screwed up big time. This was beyond awkward. Tim, being the professional that he is, was trying to brush it off as best as he could, but I could feel the tension through the screen. I didn't know whether to apologize profusely or just play it cool and hope it all blew over. I chose the latter and kept it simple, typing, "Thank you for understanding. I'll make sure that doesn't happen again." To be honest, I still don't know how he truly feels about it. But I do know one thing, I'm never texting or scrolling through my phone while I'm anywhere near the bathroom again. Lesson learned, never ever multitask when you're fresh out of the shower. The worst part? I had to go into work the next day and pretend like nothing happened. Tim didn't bring it up again, and neither did I. But every time I saw him in the office, I couldn't help but feel like there was an invisible barrier between us, as if he could somehow still see the picture in his mind. It was the most awkward couple of weeks I've had in a long time. At least now, when I look at my phone, I'm reminded of one thing: never mix naked selfies and work communications. That is a line you don't cross. Ever. Never again. TIFU by accidentally sending a text to my boss that was meant for my girlfriend, and now my career is in jeopardy. It all started on a regular Wednesday morning. I woke up at 7 a.m., like I do every day, and immediately grabbed my phone to check if I had any new messages. My girlfriend, Emily, had sent me a few texts overnight, mostly just cute stuff, a couple of emojis, and one asking me if I was free later that evening for a date night. We had been together for a year and had a pretty solid routine, so texting each other throughout the day was no big deal. I quickly replied to her messages, telling her that I was free and excited for the night. As I was texting her back, I saw a message from my boss, Karen, about a meeting at 10 a.m. I groaned internally because I hadn't had my morning coffee yet, and Karen always had this way of scheduling meetings that felt unnecessary. But I wasn't about to ignore it. So, I messaged back, confirming I'd be there on time. But here's where things took a turn for the worse. In the midst of trying to reply to both Emily and Karen, I got distracted. I often get my messages mixed up when I'm half asleep, and, well, this morning was no exception. I had been texting Emily about how we were going to make plans for a wild night, a phrase I'd jokingly used because we were planning to grab dinner and watch a movie at home. We had no intention of doing anything crazy, just enjoying a low-key night. Now, as you can probably guess, I had every intention of sending that to Emily, but in my tired haze, I ended up sending the text to Karen instead. And if that wasn't bad enough, I didn't realize it immediately. I didn't even check the recipient, just hit send, and went about my morning. The text I sent Karen was, "I'm looking forward to a wild night tonight. Let's make it unforgettable, winky face." I stared at my phone in shock for a few seconds. I immediately panicked because Karen was the last person I wanted to have that kind of conversation with. I frantically opened my messages and saw my mistake. Of course, the message had gone to Karen and not Emily. I started sweating. Karen was my direct manager at a fairly large tech company, and we had a pretty professional relationship, to say the least. There had never been any hint of anything personal between us. The idea of her reading something like that made my heart race. I considered texting her back immediately to explain it, but I froze. The more I thought about it, the more mortified I became. What if she thought I was making some sort of inappropriate advance? What if she interpreted the wild night comment as something completely different? What if she thought I was trying to be unprofessional or flirt with her? I had no idea how to salvage this. I tried to distract myself by getting ready for work, but my mind kept spiraling. I was already late for the meeting, and all I could think about was how to fix my mistake. I decided that when I got to work, I'd apologize to Karen immediately, act like it was a silly mistake, and assure her it was meant for someone else. Surely, that would clear things up, right? I rushed to get dressed, grabbed my coffee, and sped to the office. My heart was still racing. When I arrived, I found Karen waiting for me outside the meeting room, which only made my anxiety worse. She was standing there with her arms crossed, staring at me with a somewhat puzzled expression. I immediately blurted out, "Karen, I need to apologize for the text I sent earlier. It was meant for someone else. A huge mistake. I'm really sorry." Karen raised an eyebrow and responded, "I figured as much, but I wasn't going to bring it up unless you did." My mind raced even faster. What did she mean by that? Had she seen through my awkward attempt to cover up my blunder, or was she just being polite? I had no idea, but the tension in the air was palpable. I tried to laugh it off, hoping to diffuse the situation. "Yeah, you know how it is, just a slip of the thumb. Definitely not meant for you." Karen gave me a half smile. "Right. I just thought it was a bit odd. I wasn't sure what to make of it. But if it was a mistake, I guess we can just move on." I felt a slight wave of relief, but my stomach was still in knots. We went into the meeting, and I did my best to focus. But every time Karen spoke, I could feel her eyes on me like she was silently judging me for the weirdest text she'd ever gotten from an employee. I tried to tell myself it was all going to be fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the damage had been done. After the meeting, Karen pulled me aside for a quick word. She said, "I know this is awkward, but I don't want any misunderstandings. I've worked with plenty of people before, and things like this happen. But just remember, if you need something to get off your chest or want to talk about anything, there's a better way to do it than texting me about wild nights. Okay?" I was speechless. I didn't know how to respond. All I could do was nod, my face flushed with embarrassment. I thanked her for being understanding, though I was still dying inside. The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions of my tasks, but the knowledge that Karen had seen that message, my poorly timed, badly phrased, and completely embarrassing text, kept haunting me. I kept thinking about how it might affect my reputation at work. What if she thought I wasn't serious about my job? What if others found out about it? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just ruined everything. Later that afternoon, Emily texted me, asking how my day was going. I hadn't told her about the mess up yet, so I thought it might be a good time to explain. I typed out, "Hey, I made a huge mistake this morning. I accidentally sent a text meant for you to my boss." Emily responded almost immediately, "Wait, what? How did you do that?" I filled her in on the details, and she found it hilarious. "That's so awkward. You definitely should have told her it was a wild night of work-related stuff," she joked. While Emily's response helped a little, I still felt like my career was on the line. I kept replaying the moment in my head, wondering if Karen would see me as unprofessional or inappropriate. I spent the rest of the week trying to act normal, but I couldn't help but feel like something was off. Karen was polite, but there was a definite distance between us now. A week later, Karen called me into her office. My heart sank as I walked in, fearing the worst. But surprisingly, she was all business as usual. She didn't bring up the text, didn't mention anything awkward. We went through the usual work talk, and by the end of the meeting, she gave me a compliment on a project I'd been working on. It wasn't until much later that I realized Karen had probably already forgotten the incident. As embarrassed as I was, I think she was trying to let it go, even though I'll never live it down in my own head. So yeah, TIFU by texting my boss about a wild night and nearly derailing my career before it even really started. TIFU by accidentally starting a full-on neighborhood feud that spiraled out of control and ended with the police being called. It all started innocently enough. I'm not the kind of person who gets involved in drama, and I've always prided myself on being a good neighbor. My new neighborhood is pretty chill, most people are friendly, and everyone keeps to themselves, which I like. I've been living here for about 6 months now, and I've made an effort to introduce myself to the neighbors. There's one family that lives next door, the Millers, who seem nice enough. They have a teenage daughter, and I've waved to them a few times, but beyond that, we've had very little interaction. So, here's how it all began. The Millers have a dog, let's call him Rufus. Rufus is a golden retriever, and while he's a cute dog, he has a bit of an annoying habit, he barks constantly. And I mean constantly. When I first moved in, it wasn't too bad. Rufus would bark at squirrels, the mailman, and other random things, but I didn't think much of it. However, as time went on, the barking didn't stop. It was especially bad early in the morning and late at night. I'd be trying to sleep, and the barking would be piercing through my walls. I couldn't take it anymore. One night, I had been up late working on some freelance projects, and I was just about to fall asleep when the barking started again. It was past midnight, and it felt like Rufus was in my bedroom barking directly into my ear. I tossed and turned for a bit, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. The barking persisted. By 12:30 a.m., I was beyond frustrated. I got out of bed, grabbed a sweatshirt, and stormed out the door. I had never really interacted with the Millers beyond a few polite greetings, but I figured this was it, I was done being polite. I marched next door and knocked on their door. After a few moments, the dad, Mr. Miller, opened the door. He looked surprised to see me standing there, but I could tell he wasn't thrilled to see me at that hour. "Hey, I'm really sorry to bother you, but your dog has been barking for the past hour, and I haven't been able to sleep. Do you think you could bring him inside or do something about it?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite my frustration. Mr. Miller blinked a few times, clearly not expecting this, and then he looked over his shoulder toward the living room where Rufus was still barking. "Oh, yeah, sorry about that," he said awkwardly. "He's been really hyper lately. I'll see if I can get him inside." I thought the conversation was over, but then he added, "Maybe you should get some earplugs or something." I was taken aback. I had just come over to politely ask him to handle the situation, and now I was being told to just deal with it. I didn't think that was the most reasonable response, especially considering that I wasn't the one causing the noise. But I just nodded and said, "All right, well, I'll let you handle it. I hope we can get it under control." I turned to walk away, but then he called after me. "Hey, I'm sorry again. Rufus just gets excited sometimes. I'll try to fix it." I walked back to my house, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. I couldn't believe how dismissive he was about the situation. Maybe it was a minor issue to him, but to me, it felt like my sleep was being disrupted night after night. I wasn't about to let it slide. The next morning, I woke up, tired and groggy, but I went about my day. I figured the barking might be better since Mr. Miller had promised to handle it. But no, the barking was still there, just as loud and obnoxious as ever. It was like he hadn't even bothered to do anything about it. So, I took matters into my own hands. I'm not proud of what I did next, but in my tired, frustrated state, I called animal control. It wasn't just because of the barking that morning, this had been an ongoing problem for weeks, and I had tried to address it like a reasonable adult. Now, I was done. The dog had to be dealt with. I figured the authorities would have some solution, like making the Millers bring the dog inside or, at the very least, putting a noise complaint on record. Animal control came by that afternoon, and I saw them talking to Mr. Miller when I got home. He looked visibly upset, and the conversation seemed tense. I watched from my window as the animal control officer walked away, and Mr. Miller slammed the door behind him. I could feel the tension building in the air, but I tried not to think too much about it. I figured the issue was finally being addressed. That evening, things escalated quickly. I was sitting in my living room, eating dinner, when I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find Mr. Miller standing there, fuming. "Did you really call animal control on me?" he practically shouted. I was taken aback. "What?" I was just trying to get the situation fixed. "Your dog barks all night long, and it's been going on for weeks." He scoffed. "You could have just talked to me like an adult. Instead, you went behind my back and called the authorities like some snitch." I tried to calm him down, but he wasn't having it. "You've been nothing but a nuisance since you moved in here. This is your fault, not mine." At that point, things went completely off the rails. He started yelling, and I could feel the tension building. We were both standing there, screaming at each other, when the teenage daughter, who I had never spoken to before, came out of the house. She started yelling at me too, calling me all kinds of names. It was chaos. I was in shock. This whole thing had spiraled so quickly. The neighbors on the other side of me came outside to see what was going on, and before I knew it, I had a small crowd gathering. I didn't want to be the bad guy in this, but now I was caught in the middle of a full-blown neighborhood feud. The situation got even worse when Mr. Miller threatened to call the police on me for harassment. At that point, I was done. I didn't want things to go any further, so I apologized, but he wasn't interested in hearing it. He stormed back into his house, and I went inside mine, feeling like my life had just turned into a soap opera. To make matters even worse, the next day, I received a visit from the police. Apparently, the Millers had called them on me for the harassment and disturbing the peace. I tried to explain my side of things, but the officer wasn't really interested in hearing it. He told me that if I didn't try to resolve the issue civilly, it could escalate further. At that point, I knew I had made a huge mistake. Calling animal control had been the wrong call. It wasn't just about the barking anymore, it was about how badly I had handled the situation. I tried to reach out to Mr. Miller to apologize, but he wouldn't answer the door. It's been a few weeks now, and things are still awkward between us. Rufus is still barking, but I haven't had the guts to bring it up again. I'm hoping time will cool things down, but I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes it's better to just talk things out before things spiral out of control. So yeah, I fucked up. A simple noise complaint turned into a full-blown neighborhood feud, and now I have to live with the consequences. Hopefully, the next time I have a problem with a neighbor, I'll handle it more diplomatically. But for now, I'm just hoping things settle down soon. TIFU by accidentally sending an embarrassing email to my entire company. So, I'm just a regular employee at a medium-sized tech company. Nothing too special, but I do my job well, or at least I try. A couple of weeks ago, I made a huge mistake that almost got me fired. It all started with an email, and I can tell you right now it's something I'll never live down. It was a normal Friday afternoon, and I was wrapping up my work for the week. My boss, Karen, let's call her that, because that's her name, and, well, you'll see why it's fitting, had asked me to send out an email to the entire company to announce the completion of a project. The project had been in the works for months, and now that it was over, Karen wanted to send out a thank you email to everyone involved. All the important people would be on the list: the project managers, the designers, the engineers, the marketing team, the whole department. The thing is, Karen was known for micromanaging everything, and she made a very specific request: be sure to add a personal touch to the email. Don't just send a generic message. I want everyone to know how hard they've worked and how proud we are of them. It wasn't anything major, just a little extra bit of personality. But I, being the ever-diligent worker, took this as an opportunity to go the extra mile. I sat down, thought about the people on the list, and decided I would write something unique for each team involved. I thought it would make the email feel even more personal, so I spent a solid hour crafting my message. Once it was ready, I started to copy-paste the sections for each team. My mouse was on autopilot as I started to edit and send the email. I wasn't really thinking, and that's where my first mistake came in. I clicked on the wrong email thread, my own personal one, and I copied and pasted the message into it instead of the official company email list. I noticed this immediately, of course, because I saw my personal inbox. But, not really thinking about it, I just clicked send anyway, convinced that I would fix it afterward. And you guessed it. I sent that email not only to my entire company but to all of my personal contacts. At first, I didn't realize the gravity of the situation. I thought it was just a minor mistake, an email sent to a few people who didn't matter. But as soon as I hit send, I noticed a few things that made my stomach drop. First, my email was riddled with, well, let's just say personal comments. I had been trying to write personalized notes for the different teams, but in my haste, I had mixed up some sections. So, the email was now filled with absurdly intimate and wildly inappropriate remarks. For example, I had written to the design team, "Great job on the project, guys. Your work was really, really impressive. You've all been killing it, and I can't wait to see how we'll all celebrate tonight. Maybe we'll grab some drinks after work, right?" The thing is, I had actually copied and pasted this message from a personal email I had been writing to my best friend. We'd been discussing weekend plans, and I meant to send her a note saying that we should go grab drinks later. But somehow, that text made it into my professional email. To make things worse, I was also part of a work group chat, and for some reason, I sent the email to the group as well. What should have been a professional thank you note quickly turned into a personal invitation for the entire company to go drinking, despite the fact that it wasn't even relevant to the work email. As soon as I saw that, panic set in. I thought about trying to recall the email, but then I realized, this is a company-wide email. There's no way I can undo this. I immediately jumped to my work chat, where all of my colleagues were already beginning to react. Some were confused. Others were laughing. And some were just plain shocked. One person had replied with, should I be worried that this was meant for us or someone else? But wait, it gets worse. As I scrolled through the email thread, I realized I hadn't just sent the message to my colleagues at the company. I had sent it to a number of high-level clients as well. Clients we'd been working with for months. Clients I had personally interacted with. They had all received the same invitation for drinks. I immediately went into damage control mode. I started typing apologies to everyone who had received the email, hoping I could at least minimize the fallout. I wrote, "I'm terribly sorry, everyone. Please disregard that email. It was not intended for you, and it contains personal content that was meant for a private conversation. My sincere apologies for the confusion." But it didn't stop there. Oh no. One of our more tech-savvy senior developers, Dave, who's always been a bit of a prankster, immediately shared a screenshot of my email in the company-wide Slack channel. The caption? "Looks like / my name is trying to get us to go out for drinks. Who's in?" Within minutes, my email became the joke of the office. People were mocking my attempt at being personal, and others were just sending memes about how awkward it must have been. Every single person in the company was now in on the mistake. I tried to salvage some dignity by sending an official apology to the whole company, but it was clear that the damage was done. The email thread blew up with people sending their RSVPs to the drinks event, and it turned into a day-long saga of jokes, memes, and embarrassment. By the end of the day, I had made it clear to Karen, my boss, that I'd messed up. I thought I was going to get fired for sure. I even started looking up job postings, just in case. Surprisingly, Karen was incredibly understanding. She told me that she appreciated my efforts in trying to be personal with the email, but she also reminded me that it's important to double-check where you're sending things, especially when there are high-profile clients involved. She didn't fire me, but the whole office found out about the email mistake. To this day, my colleagues still joke about it whenever we talk about personal emails or company-wide communications. I think it's become some sort of office legend at this point, and I'm the one who will never live it down. Lesson learned: always double-check your email recipients. And for the love of God, don't mix up your personal and work messages unless you're prepared to face the consequences. I'll never be able to look my coworkers in the eye without thinking about that email. I can't believe that's what I'll be known for. TLDR, sent an embarrassing, personal email to my entire company, including clients, by mistake. Got roasted by the entire office and nearly fired for it. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a homemade dinner and almost setting my apartment on fire, so I, 27M, have been crushing on this girl, Emily, 26F, for a while now. We met at a mutual friends party about 2 months ago, and ever since then, I've been trying to figure out a way to ask her out. I'm not really the type to do the whole sliding into DMs thing, and I thought making the first move in a slightly more old-fashioned way could work out. I decided that the best way to show her I'm a good catch was by cooking her a nice homemade dinner. Big mistake. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a chef. I can barely cook instant ramen without burning it. I usually eat out or order in, but I figured this was the perfect opportunity to try and impress her. I mean, what's more romantic than a guy who can cook, right? Plus, I wanted to make sure everything was perfect so she'd be impressed. So, I scrolled through Pinterest, found a recipe for a simple but elegant pasta dish, and decided that would be my go-to. A safe choice, something basic that couldn't go too wrong. Or so I thought. I started off by going to the store to get the ingredients. I was already feeling the nerves. My palms were sweating, and I kept second-guessing myself. Did I need fresh basil or dried? Should I get the fancy olive oil or the regular kind? So many choices. I probably spent an extra half hour in the store because I kept walking up and down the aisles looking at every single ingredient. At one point, I thought I saw Emily's friend from the party and got paranoid she was going to tell her about my grand plans. But no, it wasn't her. It was just some random girl who didn't even look in my direction. Still, I took it as a sign of my nerves being in full swing. Finally, I checked out and I headed home, ready to prepare the most romantic dinner of my life. When I got back to my apartment, I realized I didn't actually have all the equipment I needed. I didn't have a big enough pan, I didn't have the right kind of mixing bowl, and I definitely didn't have a wine opener. After a quick search on Amazon, I realized I wasn't going to be able to get any of that stuff in time, so I made do with what I had. I thought, how bad could it be? I started cooking around 4:30 p.m., planning to have everything ready by 6 p.m. when Emily was supposed to come over. I had just enough time to get everything prepped, cooked, and, hopefully, plated nicely before she arrived. I began by boiling the water for the pasta. The recipe said to wait until the water was at a rolling boil, but my nerves got the best of me, and I threw the pasta in before I even saw any bubbles. Panic was setting in. I figured I'd just get everything done as quickly as possible. After a few minutes, I realized I didn't know how to make the sauce, so I quickly Googled how to make pasta sauce with tomatoes and garlic. Apparently, garlic burns pretty easily if you don't keep a close eye on it, and, well, I didn't. The garlic started to smell like it was on the edge of burning, and I freaked out. I quickly threw in the tomatoes without even letting the garlic caramelize. The smell was now somewhere between burnt garlic and an overcooked can of soup. I could feel my stomach doing flips as I realized how far off track I was. At this point, I decided I needed to at least get the table set so it looked like I had my life together. I rushed over to my tiny dining table, but in my haste, I knocked over a wine glass that shattered across the floor. Great. That was just the kind of vibe I was going for. A broken glass, a burnt sauce, and half-cooked pasta. Emily was going to be so impressed. I rushed to clean it up, but I didn't realize the sauce had started to bubble over and splatter all over the stove. By the time I had cleaned up the glass, I noticed a faint smell of something burning. I quickly turned to check on the pasta, only to see it was sticking together into a giant blob. Panic began to take hold, and I started tossing the pasta around in the pot like I knew what I was doing. The sauce, which I had added too much salt to in an attempt to salvage the burnt flavor, was now too salty to even taste. I tried to salvage what I could by throwing it all together on a plate, hoping she wouldn't notice how disastrous it was. But as I reached for the plate, I saw something that made my heart drop. Smoke. A lot of smoke. The burner I had been using for the sauce was now covered in small flames, and I was one step away from having a full-blown kitchen fire on my hands. I frantically grabbed the nearest towel and tried to wave it at the flames, but it only made things worse. I grabbed a pot lid and slapped it down on the pan, but by then the smoke had completely filled my apartment. I grabbed my phone and called 911, heart pounding in my chest. I was convinced my whole apartment was going to burn down. While I waited for the fire department to arrive, I had one thought: Emily is going to think I'm a complete mess. Not only would I fail to impress her with my cooking skills, but I might also end up getting her into a situation where she's watching a grown man try, and fail, to put out a small fire. After what felt like forever, I could hear the sirens approaching. A few fire trucks pulled up outside my building, and I watched in utter embarrassment as firefighters stormed into my apartment and put out the remaining flames in less than a minute. At this point, Emily had texted me asking if everything was okay. I had no idea what to say. I didn't even know if I should apologize for the disaster or play it off as if it was just a small hiccup. But then, as the firefighters wrapped up and were about to leave, one of them casually said, for next time, maybe just stick with the microwave. A lot less risk of burning your place down. Yeah, that didn't make me feel better. So, Emily never came over that night. I texted her to apologize, but I didn't get a reply until the next day. She said she hoped I was okay and that she'd still love to hang out sometime, though I was pretty sure she was just trying to be polite. Needless to say, I never tried cooking for anyone ever again. And to top it all off, my landlord sent me a bill for smoke damage. Moral of the story? Never try to impress anyone with your cooking skills if you don't know how to cook. And maybe, just maybe, invest in a fire extinguisher. So, I, 28M, have a long-running tradition with my best friend Jake, 29M. We've been tight since middle school and have this weird habit of making dumb bets with each other on almost anything. It started small, like betting on who could finish a whole pizza the fastest, or who could stay up the latest on a Saturday night. Over the years, it escalated into bigger and more ridiculous things. But, as of today, I'm convinced that we've reached a point where things have gone too far, and I'm the one who's paying the price for it. It all started about 6 months ago. We were having one of our usual hangout sessions at his apartment, eating junk food, playing video games, and, of course, making dumb bets. The one that would set everything in motion came after a particularly heated round of Mario Kart. Jake and I are both competitive, and it's not unusual for us to go back and forth trying to one-up each other. This time, I ended up winning by a very narrow margin, we're talking milliseconds. Jake, of course, wasn't happy about it and started insisting that it was all luck and that I didn't deserve the victory. After arguing back and forth, we made a bet. Jake said that if he could beat me in a game of Super Smash Bros., which he was incredibly good at, I'd have to do whatever he wanted for an entire day. Without hesitation, I agreed. In hindsight, that was the first mistake I made. The next day, Jake texted me that he wanted to cash in on the bet. I had already mentally prepared myself for some dumb prank, maybe a weird outfit to wear in public or an embarrassing challenge. But no, Jake had something far worse in mind. He told me that for my day of servitude, I had to accompany him to his sister's wedding as his plus one. I was confused, but also hesitant. See, Jake's sister, Melissa, is the kind of person who's always been somewhat particular. She's incredibly focused on the details of everything in her life. The wedding was supposed to be a fancy affair, and I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. I tried to back out of it, claiming I didn't have anything formal to wear, but Jake just told me to figure it out. So, I ended up buying an overpriced suit, which I'll never wear again, by the way. I also realized that Jake had been slowly building up the anticipation by telling me little things about his sister's wedding that made it sound more and more like a disaster waiting to happen. He said it was going to be a nightmare of an event and that Melissa was really specific about everything, but I didn't think it would be that bad. I thought it was just his usual exaggeration. The wedding day arrived, and I was not mentally prepared for what was ahead. I showed up to Jake's house early, in my suit, only to find out that I'd need to drive us both to the venue, which was an hour away. Jake claimed that he was too nervous to drive, so I was left with no choice but to follow through on my part of the bet. I remember the entire drive there, Jake kept hyping me up like I was about to perform in a play or something. He was clearly enjoying every second of my discomfort. When we got to the wedding venue, things started to get weird. Jake's sister's wedding was held at this lavish country club, and it looked like something out of a movie. The decorations were stunning, the guests were all in their best formal attire, and the food smelled amazing. I thought I might be wrong about the whole thing, maybe it wouldn't be so bad after all. And then we walked into the reception hall. It was like a scene from an elaborate horror show. The moment we entered, Jake's sister Melissa came over with a big fake smile on her face and immediately started criticizing my tie. She told me it wasn't the right shade of blue and that it clashed with my suit. I didn't even know what to say. I tried to explain that I had no idea what I was doing when it came to dressing up, but she wasn't having any of it. She said I had to go back to the car and change. This was just the beginning of the bizarre demands that followed. Jake, of course, didn't help. He just stood there, grinning like an idiot, watching me get thrown under the bus. He whispered to me that I should just go along with it, and that it's all part of the fun. Fun for who, exactly? The next few hours were a blur of awkwardness. I spent most of the time trying to avoid eye contact with Melissa, who kept giving me weird tasks like adjusting the flowers on the tables, helping the photographer with random candid shots, and even carrying her purse during the ceremony. I had no idea what I was doing. The whole thing was an absolute nightmare. At one point, I accidentally spilled a glass of wine on a guest's dress, and that's when I knew my life was going to be ruined. But the real kicker came during the reception when I was asked to dance with Melissa's grandmother. Now, I'm not a terrible dancer, but I'm also not someone who enjoys waltzing around in front of a crowd. I tried to politely decline, but Melissa insisted, saying it was part of family tradition. So, there I was, awkwardly twirling around the dance floor with a woman who clearly knew how to outdance me with one hand tied behind her back. The entire crowd was watching, and I felt my face turn a shade of red that should be illegal. After what felt like an eternity, the reception finally came to an end. I was mentally exhausted, physically sore from dancing, and emotionally drained from being forced to do everything on Melissa's list. I thought I'd never get out of there. But as Jake and I were about to leave, he leaned in and whispered in my ear, "You didn't think I was going to let you off that easy, did you?" Apparently, he had set me up for something even worse. He told me that he had made another bet with his sister, and the stakes were high. I had no choice but to take part in some weird, forced after-party event, where the winners would get to take home a giant stuffed bear. I don't even know where that came from. I spent another 2 hours pretending to be enthusiastic, making small talk with relatives I didn't know and trying to act like I was enjoying the whole charade. I finally escaped and drove home, exhausted and feeling like a pawn in someone else's game. I'm never agreeing to another bet with Jake again. I'm done with this tradition. I don't care if he wants to bet on who can hold their breath the longest or who can recite the alphabet backward the fastest. I will not be his wedding date again. Never. Jake still teases me about it from time to time, and I'm pretty sure he finds it hilarious. But honestly, if I never set foot in another wedding, I'll be just fine. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by trying to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic dinner and ended up causing a week-long disaster. It all started a few weeks ago when I decided I wanted to do something special for my girlfriend, Emily. She's the type of person who loves thoughtful gestures, and I've been feeling like I've been slacking in that department recently. So, I came up with the perfect plan. I would cook her a surprise dinner at home, complete with a fancy candlelit setting and a playlist of her favorite songs. I'd even write her a heartfelt letter. Everything was going to be perfect. I have no culinary experience. Not even a little. Sure, I can make toast and microwave some frozen pizza, but anything beyond that is a complete mystery to me. But I figured this was the perfect opportunity to impress her. How hard could it be, right? I did some research and settled on a 3-course meal, appetizer, main dish, and dessert. I was going to make bruschetta, a homemade lasagna, and a chocolate lava cake. Sounds simple enough for a beginner, doesn't it? I set aside a whole day to prepare. I made a list, got all the ingredients from the store, and cleared out my kitchen. The plan was to cook the food, set the mood with candles, and then when she arrived home from work, I'd surprise her with the dinner. The first part of the plan was the appetizer, bruschetta. It was just chopped tomatoes, garlic, basil, olive oil, and some crusty bread. How could that go wrong? Well, I'm the kind of person who can burn water, so naturally, I managed to completely butcher the bread. I burned it so badly that it was more charcoal than toast. And the tomatoes? I accidentally dropped a whole container on the floor. I spent the next 15 minutes wiping tomato juice from every corner of the kitchen, muttering curse words to myself. By the time I finished the bruschetta, which ended up being some sad, slightly charred bread with an overly generous helping of garlic and basil, I was already sweating and regretting my life choices. But I pushed on. I had to. I couldn't back out now. Emily would be home soon, and I was going to make this work, even if it killed me. The main course was the lasagna. I thought, how hard could assembling pasta sheets and sauce be? But, of course, I forgot one critical piece of advice I'd read: you're supposed to let the sauce simmer for hours before using it. So I dumped everything into a pot and started cooking it all at once. By the time I put the lasagna in the oven, the smell was so off that even my dog refused to come near the kitchen. But I was committed. I told myself that it would be fine, and that if anything went wrong, I could just drown it in cheese. While the lasagna was baking, I moved on to the dessert, the chocolate lava cake. This should have been the easiest part, right? I followed the instructions carefully melting the chocolate, whisking the eggs, and getting everything perfectly mixed. But in my eagerness, I forgot one key ingredient: flour. So when I poured the batter into the ramekins and put them in the oven, I immediately realized something was wrong. The cakes weren't rising. Instead, they were spreading out like pancake batter. After about 15 minutes of baking, the lava cakes were nothing more than flat, gooey chocolate puddles. The consistency was all wrong. I panicked, desperately trying to salvage them, but there was no saving these sad cakes. Emily was supposed to come home in about an hour, so I quickly decided to try to clean up and set the scene. I dimmed the lights, lit a dozen candles, and set the table with my best dinnerware. The charred bruschetta sat in the middle of the table, surrounded by the sad lasagna, which was now a burnt, cheese-covered mess. The lava cakes were in the oven, probably turning into something resembling chocolate syrup. At this point, I was on the verge of a meltdown. I had no idea how I was going to explain this disaster to Emily. She was going to be so disappointed, and I'd look like a complete fool. But then, something happened. I heard the front door open, and I quickly rushed to greet her, trying to put on a calm, confident face. "Hi, babe," I said, forcing a smile. "I made us dinner." She looked a little confused but smiled back. "Wow, this looks fancy. What's the occasion?" "I just wanted to do something nice for you," I said, trying to sound casual, but internally I was screaming. I sat her down, and she took a bite of the bruschetta. Her face instantly changed from confusion to concern. This bread, is it supposed to be this crispy?" she asked, her voice a little tight. "Yeah. It's a special kind of crispiness," I said, desperately trying to salvage the situation. "It's artisanal. Very trendy right now." She nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Next, we moved on to the lasagna. She took one bite and immediately set her fork down. Honey, is everything okay with this?" she asked gently. "It tastes a little off." "Oh, no," I said, trying to act surprised. "That's just a new recipe I found online. It's a rustic style of lasagna. It's experimental." At this point, she was looking at me like I had lost my mind. But I pressed on, hoping that the lava cakes would save the day. I pulled them out of the oven, and they were as flat as pancakes. I placed them on the table, and she stared at them for a long moment. "They look different," she said slowly. "Well, they're lava cakes, so the inside is supposed to be gooey," I said, trying to sound convincing. "But they're supposed to be a little unconventional. You know, like avant-garde art." Emily just stared at the cake for another moment, then looked at me. "Babe, what the hell happened here?" she asked, laughing nervously. I explained the entire disaster, from my lack of cooking skills to my failed attempts at salvaging the situation. She burst into laughter, which made me feel a little better, but also a little worse at the same time. "You didn't have to go through all this," she said between laughs. "You know I'm happy with just takeout and a Netflix night. But this? This is something else." After we finished laughing at my epic failure, we ended up ordering pizza and watching her favorite show. She was incredibly sweet about the whole thing, even telling me that the effort was what mattered most. But here's the thing, I've learned that I should probably stick to the basics. No more trying to cook fancy meals or surprise her with elaborate plans. I'll just stick to my strengths, ordering pizza and keeping things low-key. And that's the story of how I accidentally ruined a romantic dinner, but in the end, it turned into one of the funniest and most memorable nights we've had together. Sometimes, even the best laid plans can end in disaster, but if you can laugh about it, it's all worth it in the end. Moral of the story, if you can't cook, don't try to impress your significant other with a 3-course meal. It'll just end in chaos. TIFU. By accidentally burning down my friend's house during a dinner party. This happened a few years ago, but I still can't shake off the sheer level of embarrassment I felt that night. So here we go. It all started when my friend Jane invited me to her housewarming dinner party. Jane had recently moved into a gorgeous new house on the outskirts of town, and she was keen on hosting a get-together to celebrate. I'd been friends with Jane for a few years, and we had a pretty close-knit group of friends who regularly hung out, so I was excited about the evening. Besides, I'd heard her new place was stunning, and I was eager to see it in person. I arrived early, as I always do when I'm trying to make a good impression. Jane greeted me at the door with a big smile, and I could tell she'd been preparing all day. There were fragrant smells wafting from the kitchen, and the atmosphere felt warm and inviting. The guests were trickling in, and everyone was mingling, chatting about life and catching up. Now, here's the thing about me, I'm not exactly what you'd call a domestic god. I can barely cook pasta without burning it, and I generally stay away from anything that involves heat or knives unless absolutely necessary. I'd told Jane that I'd bring dessert, and in the spirit of wanting to contribute, I decided to make a homemade chocolate cake. I had never baked a cake from scratch before, but I thought, how hard can it be? It's just flour, sugar, eggs, and cocoa powder. So, I found a recipe online, gathered the ingredients, and started working my way through it. Everything was going great, until I had to put the cake in the oven. As I put the cake in the oven, I realized something. I had absolutely no idea how long to bake it. The recipe said bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 to 35 minutes, but of course, it didn't specify whether to use the top rack or the middle rack or the bottom rack. So, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to place the cake on the top rack. It seemed logical at the time, top rack equals top results, right? I didn't think to check on it halfway through or even set a timer. I just went about my business, chatting with the other guests, sipping on some wine, and admiring Jane's new house. As time passed, I began to forget all about the cake in the oven. About 45 minutes later, I smelled something strange, burnt. I turned to Jane, who was standing next to me, and said, "Hey, do you smell something burning?" Jane paused for a second, looked over at me, and immediately her face went pale. "Oh no," she muttered. "I think I left something on the stove earlier. I'll go check." I shrugged it off, figuring it was probably just a minor accident, nothing to worry about. I wasn't concerned yet. But then I noticed it, a faint trail of smoke rising from the kitchen. Jane hurried into the kitchen, and I followed close behind her, still oblivious to the impending disaster. When we walked in, the kitchen was filled with smoke. At first, I thought it was from something Jane had been cooking earlier, but when I saw the cake in the oven, my heart sank. The top rack was glowing red. My beautiful cake was on fire. I panicked. Like, full-on, head-spinning, mouth-dry panic. I didn't know what to do. Should I open the oven? Should I call the fire department? Should I just run for my life? Jane, clearly more composed than me, grabbed the oven mitts and pulled the cake out of the oven, but it was too late. The thing had caught fire, only it wasn't the whole cake that was burning. No. That would have been too simple. It was the top layer of frosting, which had melted and caught fire from the heat of the oven's top rack. To make matters worse, there was a small but intense fire happening inside the oven. The cake was basically a charcoal brick at this point. Jane looked horrified, and I could see the panic in her eyes as she tried to figure out what to do next. I wasn't much help, except for standing there, absolutely useless, muttering something like, "I'm so sorry. This was my fault. I don't know how I messed it up, but I'm so sorry." At this point, Jane quickly opened the oven door to let the smoke out, and I could see that the fire was beginning to spread to the nearby shelf where some spices and utensils were stored. "Jane, we need to get the fire extinguisher," I said, finally snapping out of my stupor. Without skipping a beat, Jane grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink, pulled the pin, and aimed it at the fire in the oven. She pulled the trigger, and the thick white foam poured out, extinguishing the flames almost immediately. The room was filled with a weird, acrid smell, and the once pleasant atmosphere of the party turned to chaos. The fire was out, but the damage had been done. The oven, the cake, and the kitchen were all in ruins. And to make things worse, the guests were starting to gather around, looking at me with a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and, I suspect, a little bit of anger. "I'm so sorry, guys," I said, trying to salvage some dignity. I didn't mean to. At this point, one of the guests, Dave, who had clearly been enjoying himself a little too much, stood up and pointed at the charred cake. "Well, at least you made it interesting," he said, raising his glass in a sarcastic toast. Everyone laughed awkwardly, but I could tell the mood had shifted. Jane tried to recover the situation, telling everyone to grab drinks and head to the living room, but the night was never the same after that. We ended up ordering pizza, and Jane's husband took over as the new chef for the evening. The rest of the night was a blur of awkward conversations and me apologizing non-stop. I tried to make up for my blunder by cleaning up the mess, but it wasn't the same. The fire extinguisher foam was everywhere. I had made a mess of Jane's brand new kitchen, and I could tell she wasn't exactly thrilled with me. To this day, I don't know if Jane's house ever smelled quite the same after that night. Every time I see her, she'll inevitably bring it up, and we both get a good laugh out of it, except for the fact that I ruined her dinner party and her oven. Moral of the story: never bake a cake when you have no idea what you're doing, and always check the oven every 10 minutes if you have no clue what you're doing. Also, don't try to impress your friends with baked goods unless you've got a backup plan for when everything goes horribly wrong. That's the story of how I burned down my friend's house during a dinner party. To this day, I'm not allowed to bake anything for group gatherings anymore. This happened last weekend, and I'm still cringing every time I think about it. So, I live with my girlfriend in a small but cozy apartment. We've been together for about 2 years now, and things have been going pretty well. We've been talking about moving in together for a while, but we hadn't taken the plunge yet. Anyway, last Saturday, we were having a lazy day at home, watching movies, making snacks, and just enjoying each other's company. Sounds perfect, right? Well, it was until I decided to surprise her with a romantic gesture. A bit of context: my girlfriend has been hinting about wanting me to be more spontaneous with romantic gestures. She's always saying things like, "I love it when you surprise me with little things," or "You're so sweet when you plan things out." She's a big fan of handwritten letters and thoughtful presents, which honestly isn't really my thing. I'm not a bad boyfriend, but I'm more of a go-with-the-flow kind of guy rather than a meticulous planner. That's something I'm aware of, and she's always trying to gently push me to be more thoughtful in that way. I figured this was my moment to shine. I decided I would write her a cute letter, nothing too long or over the top, just something that said I love her and appreciated her. Simple, sweet, and meaningful. So, I grab some paper, sit down at the kitchen table, and begin writing. Now, let me tell you, writing a love letter under pressure is a lot harder than it sounds. I was trying to find the right words to express myself without sounding like I was trying too hard. But after about 30 minutes, I thought I had something good. It was heartfelt, touching, and I even included a little inside joke we share to make it personal. I read over the letter a few times, and everything seemed fine, so I folded it up and put it in an envelope. I was feeling pretty proud of myself. The plan was to give it to her later when we were cuddling on the couch, maybe in the middle of a rom-com or something. So, I put it in my back pocket and waited for the right moment. But then disaster struck. You see, about an hour later, we decided to run out to grab some food. Nothing fancy, just a quick trip to a local taco place. As we're walking out the door, I realized I had forgotten my wallet. I rushed back to the apartment, grabbed it, and got back into the car. Everything was fine, or so I thought. When we got home, we were both hungry and just wanted to eat our tacos and chill out. I was so excited to give her the letter that I had nearly forgotten about it. But then, as we were sitting down on the couch, I reached into my pocket to grab my phone, and instead pulled out the envelope containing the letter. But when I unfolded it to give it to her, something was off. The letter had a few strange marks on it. It wasn't anything that would ruin the message, but it wasn't perfect either. Then it hit me: while I was rushing to grab my wallet earlier, the envelope had somehow gotten crushed in my back pocket. A bit of a wrinkle here, a small tear there, nothing major, but definitely noticeable. So now, I'm standing there, holding a wrinkled, imperfect letter, trying to figure out how to present it to her without making it seem like I had screwed up. I thought about smoothing it out with my hands, but that just made it look worse. It was like I was trying too hard to fix it, and the more I tried, the more obvious it became that I had ruined the surprise. I'm standing there holding this sad, crushed love letter, my girlfriend sitting next to me, looking at me with that sweet, confused expression on her face. I could feel my cheeks heating up. I had just set myself up for a perfect, romantic moment, and now it was looking more like a comedy of errors. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I felt like I was about to explode with embarrassment. My girlfriend, sensing the awkwardness, gave me a soft smile and asked, "What's going on? Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" At this point, I'm just spiraling. I don't know how to explain that I accidentally ruined the letter I was planning to give her. So, like an idiot, I blurt out, I wrote you a letter, but it's not really the way I wanted it to be. She raises an eyebrow, clearly confused, and then says, oh no, what happened? I'm frozen in place, trying to figure out how to make this situation work. I finally muster the courage to hand her the letter, saying, it's just a little bit crumpled. I guess I was in a rush earlier. She takes it from me and looks at it with a little laugh. Oh, babe, it's fine. It's the thought that counts, right? But as she starts reading, I can see her face change from amusement to confusion. She's reading the letter slowly, and then she stops, looks up at me, and says, is this your handwriting? At this point, I have no idea where this is going. Yeah? I say, feeling a little uncertain. She looks back down at the letter and then back up at me. It's in the wrong handwriting. Are you sure this is from you? I glance over her shoulder at the letter she's holding, and it hits me like a ton of bricks. The letter wasn't my handwriting. It was in my handwriting's font, but the words weren't mine. Someone else's handwriting had somehow slipped into my letter. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't some kind of weird cosmic joke. I had somehow managed to copy-paste a part of my old roommate's apology note for forgetting to do the dishes onto the bottom of the letter. This had been a letter I had copied into my own without realizing, and when I finally realized what had happened, my face turned beet red. She stared at me for a solid few seconds before bursting into laughter. She laughed so hard I thought she was going to choke. Wait, so you accidentally gave me an apology letter from your old roommate, she asked, wiping tears from her eyes. I could barely keep my composure as I tried to explain. I swear, it wasn't intentional. I must have copied the wrong part of the letter when I was looking for my notes. She couldn't stop laughing, and in the end, it became a joke we still laugh about today. In the moment, though, I wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. I guess I learned my lesson: when you try to be romantic, don't rush, and definitely don't copy-paste notes. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a romantic homemade dinner that turned into a disaster. So, I am 22, have this crush, let's call her Anna, F21. We've been friends for a while, but recently, I've been trying to step things up a notch and make her see me in a more romantic light. After a few weeks of subtle hints and awkward flirts, I decided that the perfect way to impress her would be to cook her a nice, homemade dinner. Now, I know what you're thinking: how hard can cooking dinner be? Well, dear Redditors, let me tell you, it's harder than it looks. Especially when you have no real cooking experience whatsoever. Here's the backstory: Anna and I have been hanging out a lot recently. We watch movies together, talk for hours about everything and nothing, and the chemistry is definitely there. But, for whatever reason, I never made a move. Maybe it's the fear of rejection or just being completely out of my depth, but I figured that if I could make her something special, something personal, it might be the nudge I needed to finally break the ice and take things to the next level. I've seen plenty of cooking shows, watched tons of tutorials, and I thought, how hard can it really be? So I went for it. I found a simple recipe for a homemade 3-course meal: an appetizer, a main dish, and a dessert. Now, to be clear, I had never cooked a full meal in my life. I can make instant ramen, scrambled eggs, and a decent sandwich. But this was next level. I decided on bruschetta for the appetizer, a creamy chicken Alfredo for the main course, and a chocolate lava cake for dessert. I was feeling pretty confident, despite not having a clue what I was doing. I spent the whole day prepping. I went to the grocery store and picked up all the ingredients, nothing fancy, just the basics. Or so I thought. It didn't take long for me to realize that the grocery store is a labyrinth of indecipherable labels, and I was completely out of my element. I spent a good 20 minutes in the pasta aisle trying to figure out if there was a specific type of noodle I should use for Alfredo sauce. I eventually just grabbed something that looked like it could work and moved on. The next few hours were a blur of chopping, sautéing, and Googling cooking terms. My kitchen turned into a disaster zone. Every surface was covered in food, crumbs, and random tools I had no idea how to use. The bruschetta was actually going well. How hard is it to toast bread and throw some tomatoes on top, right? But then, as I was working on the Alfredo sauce, disaster struck. I had no idea how to make the sauce. I tried to follow the instructions, but the milk and butter kept separating, and the sauce was clumping up like a weird cheese paste. I panicked. I thought, okay, I'll just keep stirring and hope for the best. But the more I stirred, the worse it got. Eventually, I had a weird, congealed, buttery mess in my pan, and the chicken I was supposed to add just refused to cook properly. I Googled how to fix broken Alfredo sauce while muttering angrily under my breath. Everything I read made no sense. One person suggested adding cream, another said I should add pasta water, and someone even suggested throwing the entire thing away and starting over. At that point, I was too far in to back out. So I added some cream, hoping it would somehow work, but instead, I ended up with a watered-down, sad excuse for Alfredo sauce. But I wasn't ready to give up. I figured I could still salvage the dinner if I managed to save the lava cake. How hard could baking a chocolate cake be, right? Well, as it turns out, baking is an exact science, and I had no idea what I was doing. I mixed up the ingredients with all the grace of a toddler on a sugar rush, and by the time I poured the batter into the ramekins, I realized I hadn't even greased the pans properly. But at that point, I just shoved them in the oven and prayed. The timer went off, and I opened the oven to check on them, but what I found was not a glorious molten center but an overcooked, deflated mess of chocolate. I stared at the sad, flat cakes in despair. They looked more like burnt hockey pucks than anything that resembled a lava cake. Now, I had a half-failed appetizer, a ruined main course, and a dessert that could double as a doorstop. But still, I decided to press on. Anna was coming over in an hour, and I didn't want to cancel, especially after I'd spent the whole day hyping up the dinner. I quickly grabbed the charred chicken Alfredo and tried to fix it by adding some random spices and a bit more cream. It wasn't going to win any awards, but maybe it would be edible? By the time Anna arrived, the kitchen looked like a war zone. The smell in the air was a mix of burnt food and desperation. I greeted her at the door, trying to mask my panic. Hey. Welcome. I hope you're hungry, I said, with a forced smile. Anna, bless her heart, was so sweet and understanding. She complimented the effort, saying it smelled good and that she was excited to try it. I led her to the table, where I had already plated the sad, watery Alfredo, the slightly burned bruschetta, and the hockey puck cakes. I tried to keep up my enthusiasm, but I'm sure she could sense that something was off. We sat down to eat, and Anna took a bite of the bruschetta. Her face immediately scrunched up. It's good, but did you use onions?" she asked, looking puzzled. I nodded awkwardly. I had used onions, but I hadn't realized they would overpower the entire dish. The bruschetta tasted like a raw onion on toast. Next came the Alfredo. Anna took a bite and chewed slowly. This is interesting. It's, a little watery though. I could feel the heat rising in my face. I explained how it was supposed to be creamy, but it just didn't work out. She smiled and said, "It's fine. You put a lot of effort into it." Finally, we got to the lava cakes. I almost didn't want her to try them, but I handed her a fork. She dug in, and when she took a bite, she didn't even try to hide her disappointment. I think it's overcooked," she said, trying to be polite. "It's more like a brownie than a lava cake." At this point, I was ready to crawl under the table and die of embarrassment. But she kept being so kind, saying things like, "Don't worry, it's the thought that counts," and "I can't believe you spent all day cooking." It was obvious that the night had been a disaster, but Anna kept her composure. When the dinner ended, I walked her out and, mortified, apologized for everything. She laughed and said, "Honestly, I had a great time." "You really tried, and that means a lot to me." A few days later, we laughed about the dinner, and I ended up ordering takeout for our next hangout. The good news? We're still friends, and who knows? Maybe one day I'll redeem myself in the kitchen. But for now, I'll be sticking to microwaving frozen pizza and calling it a day. Moral of the story? If you're going to try to impress someone with a homemade meal, maybe don't pick a complicated 3-course menu when you can't even cook pasta properly. And, if anyone knows how to fix broken Alfredo sauce, hit me up. It all started when I thought I could handle a simple favor for a friend. You know the type, someone who always asks for a small thing, and you end up saying yes because, well, it's always so small. My friend, let's call him Ben, had recently moved into a new place. He'd been bragging about how much space he had now, and how he was finally able to buy that antique oak desk he'd wanted for years. He even sent me a picture of it, and I could tell he was really proud of it. I was happy for him. He deserved it after all the crap he'd been through. So when he asked if I could help him move a few things, I agreed without hesitation. I'm not the kind of guy who gets easily intimidated by hard work. I've done my fair share of moving, so I figured it would be a piece of cake. Little did I know, this was about to turn into a catastrophe of epic proportions. Ben told me that all I needed to do was help him move a couple of heavy things into his new place, his couch, that giant desk, and a few boxes of books. I had no problem with that. It didn't seem like much, just some lifting and hauling. The plan was to meet at his new apartment after work on a Friday, grab the stuff, and then head to his place. Simple, right? I showed up at his place around 6 p.m., and he was already there, looking sweaty and out of breath. I asked what was going on and if he needed a hand with anything else. He told me that he'd already started moving some of the bigger stuff earlier that day but just needed help with the last few items. Ben also mentioned that he'd rented a U-Haul truck, and that he'd parked it outside. When I went outside to the truck, I was immediately struck by how much stuff was piled up in there. It looked like a full-on moving van, but I could see that there were only 3 things that were actually scheduled to be moved. The desk, the couch, and one of those giant industrial floor lamps. This thing was so massive, it had a base the size of a small coffee table. I shrugged it off and grabbed the first thing, Ben's couch. It wasn't particularly heavy, but it was an awkward shape. Ben had this brilliant idea to maneuver it through his narrow apartment door. Let's just say that maneuvering furniture through doorways was not as easy as it sounded, and that was the first of many mistakes. We managed to scrape the couch along the wall, and I could tell from Ben's expression that he was starting to panic. His new apartment was freshly painted, and I didn't want to be the reason he'd have to repaint the walls. By the time we got the couch inside, we both needed a break. Ben suggested we go grab some pizza before continuing the move, so we hit up the nearest place, which was a hole-in-the-wall pizza joint. It was small, but the food was great, and we needed the fuel for what was about to come. After about 45 minutes, we were back to the apartment, feeling well-fed and ready to finish the move. We decided to tackle the antique desk next. I wasn't prepared for the weight of this thing. It was solid oak, and while it looked beautiful, I immediately regretted not asking more questions when Ben described it to me earlier. We began lifting, and I swear, it was like trying to move a boulder. At one point, I felt my back strain, but I pushed through it, thinking we could just get it over with. Ben, who was clearly sweating and getting frustrated, shouted at me to hold it a little higher. That was my second mistake. I overcompensated and lifted way too much, and before I knew it, the desk slipped out of my grip. In a panic, I tried to catch it, but in doing so, I smashed my foot against the edge of the desk. The pain shot up my leg, and I fell to the ground, swearing like a sailor. Ben didn't miss a beat. He jumped into help mode and tried to assist me up, but in doing so, he stepped backward and, you guessed it, stepped right onto the base of that giant floor lamp. The lamp collapsed with a loud crash, sending metal pieces everywhere. The glass shade shattered into 1,000 pieces. I just lay there, staring at the mess, my foot throbbing and my mind racing. Ben stared at the destruction for a moment, then slowly turned to me. Well, at least the desk made it, right? I couldn't even bring myself to respond. I hobbled over to inspect the damage on my foot, which looked like I had just stomped on a nail, and Ben tried to piece together what was left of the lamp. At that point, I knew we had to take a breather. I asked Ben if we should call it a day and deal with the rest of the move later, but he insisted that we keep going. Just a couple more things left, he said. I didn't argue, because I figured we could wrap it up and get the hell out of there. The next disaster happened when we tried to move Ben's mattress. The thing was ridiculously heavy and didn't fit in the elevator, so we had to take the stairs. Halfway up, I lost my grip on it, and the mattress slid down the staircase, dragging me with it. I somehow ended up trapped under it, suffocating in fabric, while Ben was in the hallway laughing so hard I thought he was going to pass out. Eventually, we managed to get the mattress upstairs, but not without a few more close calls. The desk still wasn't inside, and now it was dark outside, so we had to resort to trying to maneuver it through Ben's narrow hallway with the help of a few neighbors. After a lot of grunting and awkward positioning, we finally managed to get the damn desk inside. Exhausted and covered in sweat, I sat down on the couch, only to realize I'd just destroyed my shoes during the whole ordeal. Ben was on the phone with someone, trying to figure out how to replace the floor lamp he'd somehow wrecked, and I was nursing my aching foot. When he got off the phone, he looked at me and said, "You know, I've never had a move this eventful." I managed a half smile, but inside, I was screaming. I looked at the mess we'd made and realized I probably wouldn't be helping him move again anytime soon. It was 11 p.m. by the time everything was inside. I hobbled home, my foot aching with every step, knowing full well that I'd be sore for days. As I collapsed into bed that night, I couldn't help but think about the pure chaos of it all. It seemed like a harmless favor at first, but now I was questioning my life choices. Ben did text me the next day, thanking me for my help, but I could tell he felt a little guilty about the whole ordeal. I told him not to worry about it, but I secretly hoped he'd remember this when I needed a favor, like maybe helping me move my IKEA furniture. So yeah, TIFU by agreeing to help my friend move. What was supposed to be a simple task turned into a comedy of errors, and now I've got a bruised foot, a back injury, and a newfound appreciation for professional movers. Never again. I have a pretty embarrassing story that still haunts me, and I'm not sure whether I should laugh about it or just disappear off the face of the earth. But here goes, I guess. It all started about 6 months ago. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I had been together for over a year, and things were going great. We had the kind of relationship where we felt comfortable sharing everything, and I had reached a point where I was ready to take it to the next level. You know, the next level. The one where you make things official in a we're in this together for life kind of way. So, naturally, I thought it was time to get her something special. Something that would tell her how much I really cared about her. I thought, hey, what's the most romantic gesture I can think of? It didn't take long before I had an idea that seemed perfect. I was going to buy a ring. Not an engagement ring, not yet, but a really nice promise ring. Something to show her I was committed and that I wanted to be with her long term. I even had the whole proposal planned out, you know, in case the moment felt right. I started saving up for it, and it was going to be a surprise. At first, I kept the whole thing a secret. I didn't want to ruin the surprise or make her think it was coming, but soon enough, my excitement got the best of me. One evening, we were watching a movie together when I casually mentioned, you know, I've been thinking about getting you something really nice. She looked up from the screen, intrigued but also kind of suspicious. What do you mean? She asked. Just something, you know, something that'll show you how much I care, I said, trying to play it cool. She raised an eyebrow. Like a necklace, she guessed. I shook my head. No, something a bit more meaningful, I said. I could see her trying to read my expression, but I was doing my best to stay neutral. She clearly wasn't buying it. Okay, she said slowly, I'm curious now. Guess you'll just have to wait, I replied, grinning. She shot me a playful glare but didn't push it further. But I could tell she was getting more and more curious. I went on the hunt for the perfect ring, scouring online stores, reading reviews, and getting all the details just right. Eventually, I found one that I thought would be perfect, a simple silver band with a small diamond, elegant but not too flashy. I figured it would be the ideal balance between showing her how much I cared without going overboard. Once I had the ring in my hands, I was so excited that I couldn't wait to give it to her. I had already been thinking about the perfect moment, and one day, I decided to go for it. We had plans to go out to dinner that evening, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity. It would be a casual date night, and I'd surprise her with the ring at the end of the evening, so the moment would feel special but not too much. So, there I was, standing in front of the mirror, checking my reflection. I'd even gone out and bought a nice button-up shirt. I felt like I was about to win Boyfriend of the Year. I had the ring hidden in my pocket, and I was rehearsing what I'd say. I wanted it to be perfect, casual but meaningful. The last thing I wanted was to mess this up. When Sarah arrived at my place, she looked stunning as usual. I tried to play it cool, but honestly, I was so nervous I could barely focus on the conversation. She noticed I was acting a little weird but didn't say anything. We went to dinner at this little Italian place we both loved. It was cozy and quiet, and everything was going according to plan. The food was great, the wine was flowing, and we were having a great time. Then came the moment. I could feel the nerves bubbling up in my stomach. It was time to bring it up. I waited until we were finishing our meal, and I casually slid the little velvet box out of my pocket. Sarah looked at it, eyes widening in confusion. I smiled, my heart racing. I got you something, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She blinked at the box for a second and then looked back at me. What is it? She asked, clearly surprised. I just wanted to show you how much I care, I said, my voice trembling slightly. This is a symbol of how much you mean to me. I opened the box, revealing the ring. Sarah stared at it, wide-eyed. At this point, I expected her to be moved, maybe tear up a little, but instead, she looked absolutely mortified. It was like a switch flipped in her. Oh my God, she whispered, backing away slightly. My stomach dropped, and I felt the color drain from my face. Is something wrong? I asked, my voice shaky now. I had no idea what was happening. She stammered, looking at the ring, then back at me. This is a bit much for right now. I'm not sure what to say. She looked like she was about to cry, but it wasn't the good kind of crying. I felt my face turning bright red. I felt like I was about to pass out. She quickly apologized, but the damage was already done. The awkwardness that filled the air was suffocating. I tried to laugh it off, saying something like no big deal, just a gift, but I could tell she was incredibly uncomfortable. We finished our meal in awkward silence. I tried to salvage the evening, but the mood was completely ruined. When we left the restaurant, she gave me a quick hug and said she needed to go home. That was it. She just left. I sat in my car afterward, staring at the ring in my hand. I couldn't believe what had just happened. What did I do wrong? I had tried to do something nice. I genuinely thought this was a thoughtful gesture, but I had somehow misread the situation completely. I tried calling her later that night, but she didn't answer. I sent a text apologizing, but it felt like it was already too late. The next few days were pure torture. She eventually responded with a very vague, "We need to talk." I knew that wasn't a good sign. When we finally met up, she explained that she wasn't ready for that kind of commitment yet. She told me she was still figuring things out and that the ring had overwhelmed her. She reassured me that it wasn't about me or how she felt about me, but that she just wasn't there yet. Honestly, I get it now, but at the time, I was crushed. The whole thing felt like a massive failure. I spent the next few weeks trying to figure out how I had messed up so badly. I ended up returning the ring, and things eventually settled down, but it was awkward for a long time. Looking back, I realize I probably rushed into things too quickly. I had this whole fantasy in my head about how the evening would go, and it just completely backfired. We're still together, and things are good, but I'll never forget that night and how I somehow managed to turn a romantic gesture into a disaster. So yeah, TIFU by trying to give my girlfriend a promise ring and totally misreading the situation. TIFU by accidentally sending a text to my boss that was meant for my girlfriend. It all started on a normal Wednesday morning. I woke up late, as usual, and rushed through my routine. I had a busy day ahead, with a meeting scheduled at 9:30 a.m., and I needed to get to work early to prepare. As I quickly grabbed my phone to check my emails while brushing my teeth, I realized I had missed a few texts from my girlfriend, Emily. One of them read, "I can't wait to see you tonight. You know I love it when you're in charge, winky face." Now, you need to understand the context here. Emily and I have been dating for about a year, and we have a pretty playful and flirtatious relationship. We always exchange these kinds of texts, and it's not unusual for me to get messages like this from her. Usually, it's nothing to worry about. But this particular morning, I was already in a rush and, naturally, a little distracted. As I finished getting dressed, I responded quickly to her text, thinking I was sending her a cute, flirty reply. The message I typed read, "You know I love being in control. I'll show you tonight. Can't wait to dominate you, winky face." At that point, I was feeling pretty confident. I hit send without even double-checking the recipient. Unfortunately, in my haste, I had accidentally selected the wrong contact from my phone's recent list. The text didn't go to Emily. It went to my boss, Steve. For some context, Steve is a 45-year-old, married father of two who has been nothing but professional with me. He's a solid boss, strict, but fair. We've never had any personal conversations outside of work, and I've never sent him anything more than the usual work-related texts. So, when I saw the little notification pop up a few seconds later, showing that my message had been delivered, I was still too distracted to realize the mistake. I wasn't until a few minutes later that I glanced at my phone again, only to see a reply from Steve. What exactly are you talking about, Jake? Do I need to get HR involved here?" That's when it hit me. The blood drained from my face. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, completely frozen. My heart began to race as I realized what had just happened. In the span of 1 minute, I had gone from feeling confident about my morning to being in absolute panic mode. I immediately tried to fix the situation. I opened the text thread with Steve and typed, "Oh my God, I am so sorry. That text was meant for my girlfriend, not you. I promise it wasn't meant for you, I swear. Please don't tell anyone." I thought about deleting the message but then realized that would only make it worse. If he saw that I was trying to cover up my mistake, it would probably make things look even worse. So I sent the message, hoping he would understand, and immediately started thinking about the worst-case scenario. What if he reported me to HR? What if he told everyone in the office? I could already hear the awkward jokes and teasing in the office for months. I stared at my phone, waiting for a response. It felt like an eternity before I got another notification. When it finally came, I was bracing myself for the worst. I opened the message. "I'm going to assume this was a mistake, Jake. Just be careful with your texts, all right?" That was it. No joke. No further questions. It was as if Steve was too professional to even bring it up again. I'm not sure if he found it funny or if he just wanted to let it slide, but whatever the reason, I felt like I had narrowly avoided a disaster. At least he didn't report me or call me into his office. Still, the whole situation left me deeply embarrassed. I immediately texted Emily, apologizing for the mix-up. I explained to her that I'd sent a message to the wrong person, and she, of course, laughed hysterically. I knew something was off when I got that text. Steve must have been so confused, she wrote. To add to the absurdity, I couldn't help but wonder whether Steve thought I was trying to do some weird power play thing. Maybe he thought I was talking about some kind of work domination, which would have been awkward to explain. If he ever brought it up again, I would probably die of embarrassment. Anyway, the rest of the day was a blur. I showed up to the office, trying to act normal, but every time Steve passed by my desk, I had to fight the urge to cringe. Was he secretly laughing at me? Did anyone else in the office know? I kept my head down, trying to focus on work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just ruined any chance of maintaining professional boundaries with my boss. Luckily, the rest of the day passed without incident. Steve didn't mention the text again, and I took that as a good sign. After a few days, I realized that I hadn't been fired or disciplined, so I guess Steve truly did let it go. However, every time I look at my phone, I still cringe a little. And every time I type a text now, I make sure to double-check the recipient. It's been a few months, and I can laugh about it now. But I'll never forget the panic I felt in those first few minutes after hitting send. It was a TIFU for the ages. TLDR, accidentally sent a flirty text meant for my girlfriend to my boss. Panicked, apologized, and somehow avoided being fired or embarrassed beyond repair. Still cringe every time I look at my phone. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a surprise dinner, only to have everything go horribly wrong. So, here's the deal. I, 24M, have been talking to this girl Emma, 23F, for a few months now. We met at a friend's party, hit it off, and have been texting pretty regularly. I was really starting to like her, and I thought she might be feeling the same way, but I wasn't 100% sure. I figured, if I did something big and impressive, it would show her how much I cared and how much effort I was willing to put into making things work. But boy, was I wrong. It all started when I decided to plan a surprise dinner for her. I'm not a great cook, but I knew just enough to make something decent. I also wanted to make it extra special, so I picked out a nice little place in the countryside where they serve amazing food, but also have this private dining experience where you get to cook together in this cool little kitchen area. It's a bit fancy, but I thought it would make a big impact and show her that I was willing to go all out. Now, to the actual planning part. I had a friend who worked at a fancy cooking supply store, so I asked him for advice on what ingredients to get and how to make the dinner foolproof, as he put it. Of course, I listened to him, but he's the kind of guy who always gives you more than you ask for. He sold me all sorts of high-end gadgets, spices, and exotic ingredients, telling me I'd need them for the dishes I was planning to cook. I was a bit skeptical at first, but I figured I'd trust him. The plan was simple. I'd surprise Emma by picking her up, taking her to this secret location, and then we'd cook together. I wanted to make it romantic but also fun. I was envisioning something like one of those romantic cooking shows where everything goes perfectly and there's a moment where we both look at each other and laugh while making something amazing. It was going to be magical, or so I thought. The night before, I spent hours prepping. I had to chop, marinate, and arrange everything just so. The kitchen looked like it had been hit by a storm. There were random spices everywhere, bowls and knives scattered across the counters, and the smell of garlic was practically choking me out. At one point, I looked around and thought, maybe I went a little overboard. But I shrugged it off because I was committed at this point. When I picked up Emma, she was already impressed by the whole secret dinner idea. She asked where we were going, but I kept it a surprise. I drove us out to the countryside, and when we got to the venue, she was blown away by how beautiful and secluded everything was. The place was this rustic cabin overlooking a vineyard, and it looked perfect. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Then came the cooking part. We walked into the kitchen, and I proudly showed off all the ingredients I had prepared. The chef who was supposed to guide us through the meal greeted us, but he immediately looked concerned when he saw all the random ingredients I had brought. "This isn't part of the menu," he said, raising an eyebrow at the strange assortment of spices and obscure vegetables I'd bought. I laughed nervously and explained that I wanted to surprise Emma with something more than just the standard meal they offered. The chef, looking a little unsure, agreed to go along with it. The next hour or so was a disaster. I didn't realize how uncoordinated I'd become under the pressure of impressing Emma. The garlic was burning, the sauce was curdling, and I was struggling to work the fancy equipment. At one point, I managed to set off the fire alarm while trying to flambe something. We both stood there awkwardly, waiting for the smoke to clear, while the chef muttered something under his breath about needing more fire extinguishers. Emma, to her credit, tried to stay positive. She joked about how this would make a great story to tell our friends, and I could tell she was trying to make the best of the situation. But I could see it in her eyes that she was getting more and more uncomfortable. She wasn't used to seeing someone so incompetent, especially with the level of effort I had put into everything. By the time we actually managed to plate some food, barely, it was almost inedible. The fish was undercooked, the vegetables were soggy, and the sauce had the consistency of glue. But we still sat down, tried to laugh through it, and attempted to enjoy the meal. It was obvious neither of us were enjoying it, though. Every bite felt like a mini failure, and the more I tried to salvage the evening, the worse it seemed to get. At the end of it all, the meal was a bust, and I felt like I had ruined everything. Emma was kind enough to say she had fun, but I could tell she was disappointed. The magic I had hoped to create was completely gone. We left the venue early, and on the way back to her place, the silence in the car was almost unbearable. I dropped her off, and she thanked me for the evening, but I could see she was polite more than anything else. Afterwards, I sat in my car for a while, replaying everything in my head. I had tried so hard to impress her, but in the end, it just came across as over the top and a bit ridiculous. I sent her a text the next day apologizing for the chaos and telling her that I'd hoped it would go better. She texted back saying that she appreciated the effort, but she thought maybe I had tried too hard. She told me she was still up for hanging out, but that I didn't need to go to such extremes next time. That hit me pretty hard, but I guess it was better than her just being disappointed without saying anything. In the end, I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, trying to impress someone can backfire, especially when it's over the top. I've always been the kind of guy to go big or go home, but maybe I need to dial it back a little and just focus on being myself. As for Emma, we're still in touch, and things aren't totally ruined. But I definitely learned not to try so hard to make a perfect evening. It's the imperfections that make things memorable, not the attempt to orchestrate some flawless, Pinterest-worthy night. TLDR, tried to impress my crush by planning an over-the-top surprise dinner in the countryside, but everything went horribly wrong. Burnt food, awkward moments, and a failed attempt at romance left me feeling like a failure. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.